Now it's quite early in the morning in Europe and the UK and in other parts of Asia. So thank you very much for joining in. I'd like to also welcome our state and territory colleagues and to Austrade onshore and offshore networks who've joined the call today. Thanks a lot. My name is Amit Misra, and I work in the investment division at Austrade in Sydney, focused on attracting productive foreign direct investment into the renewable energy priority sector in Australia. I'm also the investment division representative on the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group at Austrade. I'm pleased to chair today's investment focused webinar on Introduction to Engaging with First Nation Groups in the Energy Transition, which is an important pillar of cooperation on enhancing the green transition in Australia. Many thanks to our speakers for taking the time out to join us today to speak on this topic. The energy transition, as we know, is a global imperative to reduce carbon emissions and is impacting every sector and community across the world. This webinar will serve as a platform to foster understanding, dialogue, and partnerships with First Nation communities during this pivotal transition. It also supports Austrade's broader strategy to foster partnerships that integrates Indigenous innovation and knowledge into Australia's energy export and investment frameworks. Before we begin, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather and extend that respect to the elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining this session today. I'm reaching out to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and recognize the enduring connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people have with this land and acknowledge their rich histories, cultures, and contributions. Before we begin, I'd just like to cover off some housekeeping points. If I can request everyone to please keep their microphones on mute and videos off unless presenting. We'll go through both presentations in full and take questions at the end on slido.com. And that has an access code #AustradeFN. They're the first letters for First Nations. That's one word. And as indicated, the webinar is also being recorded. Now I'd like to launch straight into the session and introduce our first speaker, Brian Barrow, Principal and Director of Jarramar Legal, which is a 100% Indigenous-owned legal and consulting firm. Brian is a Meriam man who's passionate about Indigenous self-determination and socially responsible economic development for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. Brian's commercial legal experience spans complex contract negotiations and drafting, litigation, risk, compliance, regulatory matters, privacy, corporate structuring, governance, probity, legal strategy, ICT, IP across sectors, including government, airlines, technology, telecommunications, tourism, mining, and clean energy. That's a pretty expansive experience. Brian, so over to you. Sorry, Brian, I think you're on mute still.
Thank you, Amit. There are famous words as well. It's quite often used in these conferences. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge, obviously, the Wurundjeri people and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations down here in Melbourne, Naarm, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of Jarramar Legal. So we were established in 2018. We're the first national Indigenous law firm to be registered as a corporation in Australia. We provide a big suite of corporate and commercial legal services to a lot of government clients, a lot of businesses and corporates around Australia, as well as international. And our services are linked to the Indigenous communities as well, improving economic outcomes for those communities, because we do a lot of work with government corporates as well as communities, and we kind of bring that all together to assist many parties in relation to projects. Next slide, please. So today I'll be speaking on actually four topics, but the fifth one there is the item of case studies, and I'll talk to a couple of case studies through my discussion. So I'll be speaking on early engagement and consultation, what that means and the importance of this, co-designing of projects, benefit sharing, and the types of models in Australia. And I'll give you some examples of that in the case studies. And importantly as well, financing and some of the issues that are confronted in financing projects, particularly with Indigenous communities in Australia. Next slide, please. So just to set some background, Australia's clean energy transition is mandated at 82% currently, and we need to achieve that 82% by 2030. So it's currently around 36%. So we've got a long way to go in relation to meeting those targets in Australia, and there's a big coordinated effort by Commonwealth government as well as state governments. And another interesting statistic and very relevant is that about 54% of Australia is subject to First Nations interests, and that includes native title, land rights, or other types of form of land interest as well. And this is climbing as well because there's a lot of native title claims and other sort of land interest claims as well in various tribunals and other organisations around Australia through government processes. Interestingly, over 40% of projects will be conducted on First Nations land. So obviously this is an important discussion. So organisations can actually understand how to work with First Nations people respectively all around Australia. And you'll see there on the map as well, there are a few hundred different nations there. So navigating all of that is really difficult and complex at the best of times, but at least understanding the overlying sort of context at a high level will get you somewhere in terms of working with First Nations communities. There are different jurisdictions as well that have targets for renewable energy, and I can give you an example of Northern Territory, who has a supply has a potential of renewable energy of 70% coming up in the next couple of years. They have a 30% Indigenous population up there or greater. So a lot of the work will need to be conducted with Indigenous communities up there. So that's just an example of part of the jurisdiction of Australia. And obviously different laws and different regulations apply to various jurisdictions as well. So there's a real opportunity for genuine partnership and shared benefit in such arrangements all around Australia. So there's opportunity that all parties involved cannot miss Australia's clean energy transition because, let's face it, this is a once in a lifetime or once in a generation opportunity to reset how we can engage with First Nations people and how to build genuine partnerships rooted in self-determination as well as shared benefits. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to touch on early engagement, and Damien will also talk on some number of aspects as well in relation to this. So at a high level, I'll discuss some interesting points as well that that a lot of organisations should be aware of in terms of engaging with Indigenous communities. So in particular, early engagement, it is extremely important, same as any other relationship. And it's more than just a ticker box exercise. It's about building relationships before decisions are made. So that's a really important thing to sort of understand as well. It's about moving beyond business as usual sort of things. And it really talks about embedding First Nations values within the planning process as well and the operation process, right through to the decommissioning and land restoration processes as well, to ensure that all parties are, engaging respectfully, but also are happy with the process. So any consultation must start at the concept stage. So that's early. The definition of early, and before sites are actually locked in and funding is secured as well. So there's early input from the Indigenous community as well in relation to the discussion. There's also a good chance that cultural knowledge can provide value and reduce costs for a project as well. So there's another good reason why First Nations consultation very early is important. Proponents must also respect and follow the principles of free, prior and informed consent, as I've set out there. And this requires that First Nations communities are to be fully informed about a project in a timely manner, so they can make and give or withhold their consent without coercion, and their consent is obtained before any activities actually begin. So a good rule of thumb is to engage as wide as possible. So the project's footprint, as well as any influential sort of organisations around that organisation's footprint, including consulting with land councils, the traditional owner groups, prescribed body corporates, and even neighbouring communities as well that could be impacted. And finally, timelines must respect cultural processes as well. So some negotiations may take longer than expected. So a clear understanding of such processes should be kind of factored into the project and schedule up front, so all parties are actually on the same page. Next slide, please. So here are some practical steps that I've set out that will assist you in early engagement as well. So research and map country is pretty important. So identify which First Nations have rights in relation to the particular area and have cultural interests as well in the project area. So you're consulting with the rightful members. And building trust through transparency is another important factor. So share accurate and accessible information in relation to plain and ensure that it's in plain language and local formats as well. So information can be easily disseminated through the community. And once again, all parties are on the same page. Resource communities to participate as well is an important aspect as well. This could be through funding independent legal and technical advice, or even allocated resources to assist those communities as well. And this really ensures that parties are on an equal footing as well in terms of negotiating, and you come out in terms of negotiating any arrangement. All parties are happy with the arrangement that has been negotiated. Respectful decision making, allowing time for cultural consultation and collective decision making is important. This is not only respectful, but it also builds trust in the relationship. And ensure you document agreements clearly. So set out clear and mutual obligations, review pertinent points in relation to those and make them clear through the whole engagement process. And also importantly, set out clear dispute resolution processes and make sure that they are also culturally appropriate as well, because many different nations around Australia have their own sort of dispute resolution processes as well. So just respecting that is very important. Next slide, please. So co-designing projects. Essentially what co-design means is that First Nations people help shape the project and are not just providing commentary on the project. So they must be involved meaningfully. And best practice really speaks about enabling equitable partnerships through fit-for-purpose information, capacity building and First Nations-led coordination for projects. Examples of practical co-design include joint site selection, cultural heritage mapping, and embedding traditional ecological knowledge into environmental plans. So it's really important that people understand that First Nations Australians have been here for 65,000 years. So they have really intrinsic knowledge about the country and its nuances as well. A positive thing for proponents to consider is that co-design reduces risks in the project. So any delays in development will also be curtailed, and it also helps build social license. So these can only be good things. So successful co-design allows a balancing of technical and cultural knowledge, and it provides a two-way street in terms of learning processes and ensuring that parties have skin in the game. So next slide, please. So this is an example of a case study where co-designing came up with a successful project, and they're still working through this project now, but I can say that they're moving forward in leaps and bounds. So this project is a project with an organisation called Yindjibarndi Energy Corporation. So they're an Indigenous corporation developed in the Pilbara in Western Australia. And they've partnered with an organisation, ACEN, which are a big renewable energy company based in Asia. So now they operate within a board of Yinji Bandi, and they have ACE and directors on board that as well. So they both have meaningful input within this project. And this project is around developing, well, YEC is developing and constructing, as well as operating an energy project within this Pilbara region. Their ambition is to construct up to 3 gigawatt of wind, solar, and battery storage over the next several years. So this will be considered one of the biggest and largest projects, particularly a First Nations-led project anyway, within the renewable energy sector in Australia. So this partnership provides for YEC to have 25 to 50% equity within all projects, and ensures that approval of all sites provided by YEC. So the parties have that respectful engagement, as I've discussed earlier, as well as providing supply chain access security for Yinji and their businesses, which will help sort of develop their local economy as well. And they'll get involved in the construction and long-term operation of the project. Um, and we know that large corporations now, such as Rio Tinto, which is a global mining giant with operations in the region, will be looking to enter agreements now, so offtake agreements with YEC. So that's in train at the moment. So it looks like this arrangement will be quite successful, and it's all born out of the co-designing arrangement and building trust between YEC and ACEN. So they're well placed now in terms of moving this project forward. Sorry, and as I've discussed earlier, they have de-risked the project as well, because all parties have negotiated on equal footing, and now they're moving forward in a position where they're both happy. So next slide, please. So I'll just quickly touch on some best practice benefit sharing that we've seen around Australia as well. So and in terms of benefit sharing, it really goes beyond just compensation, which was previously paid in mining arrangements. So it's really all about creating that long-term economic and social value. And best practice approaches that we see in Australia include equity, as I've discussed within projects, community trust funds being developed, assistance with developing local infrastructure, preferential procurement for local and First Nations businesses, and job creation initiatives as well for the particular project, including training for sustainable careers. And we're not saying training in terms of labouring sort of jobs as well. We're talking right up to management as well, which is really important in terms of the long-term operation of these projects. So the Clean Energy Council has also suggested defining benefits across 3 levels. Either that's directly through ownership and dividends, indirect through employment and contracts, as I've discussed, and community through social infrastructure and energy security as well. So there's some of the examples of benefit sharing arrangements, particularly put forward by the Clean Energy Council, which is a trusted organisation within Australia. So when considering benefits, they should be quantifiable as well. So ensure that they are. As an example, what percentage of profits or jobs will flow locally, and who decides how these funds are being allocated. So ensure upfront that these types of things are kind of negotiated as well. And always remember that allow First Nations community to also define what benefit means, because benefit means something different to all communities, and you must sort of allow them to have their own self-determination in terms of what they consider is a benefit to their own community. Next slide, please. So here's another case study. This one is a Yandu Ilga solar project. So this is conducted in South Australia. So if you can see there on my slide, there's a map of Australia, South Australia, for those who aren't familiar with South Australia. Bottom of Australia, and the Bangala people is that I guess it's a darker blue of that map area. So they've got quite a large area there. So their project is a partnership alliance model with an organization called Yandu Ilgasola and the Bangala people as well. So it's developed by an organization called EPS Energy and AMP Energy as well in partnership with the local community there. So the key project goals include providing significant positive economic, social, and environmental outcomes, which include enabling equitable participation for the Bangala people in the South Australian region, particularly in that renewable energy sector. And they will provide long-term revenue to the Bangala Corporation as well, which represents their people and the use of the land for the benefit of the community. They will also create industry and employment diversity as well for that particular community and that region. So these are some of the important sort of benefits flowing down to the community. You can see that all the community will benefit from this type of arrangement. AMP is actually funding the co-development of this arrangement. They're funding the development approval and also the construction as well of 300 megawatts of solar, as well as having battery storage as well of 250 megawatts as well, over a area of 665 hectares of land around there. AMP will also be the long-term asset owner as well and operator through 35 years of the project. So the energy from the project will connect to the South Australian grid, and also to the national electricity market as well. So you'll see those benefits flow to the community, and it's a win-win situation as well for AMP and the shareholders there within that arrangement. Next slide, please. So importantly, I'd like to touch on financing, and Damien will speak a little bit about this as well. But from a high level, I think there's four really main issues that confront the Indigenous communities around Australia, and it's often the biggest, financing is often the biggest barrier as well in terms of ownership in projects. There is a First Nations clean energy strategy, and it sets out ways to actually combat this by proposing mechanisms like the First Nations Clean Energy Network Investment Fund, investor forums, and they talk about how to access capital and equity ownership as well through many sort of different structures, including special investment vehicles as well, where organisations deal with the community as well to set up special investment vehicles as well to assist organisations to be equity participants in these projects. So in Australia, we're seeing emerging models of blended finance. You've got grant funding from organisations. So you have organisations like ARENA Renewable Energy, the Renewable Energy Agency. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation is another organisation that assists with grant funding, as well as others to de-risk projects for the community to have equity within the project as well. So you can see that funding can be flowed down from these organisations for such projects, and I believe ARENA has around $7 billion in terms of its portfolio to spend or on grants around Australia for these types of projects. So it suggested that proponents should design deals that balance returns with social purpose as well, and ensure that they recognise cultural values as part of the project capital. So these are important aspects as well. And in some cases, First Nations entities like Indigenous Business Australia, which I'm on the board of, or other state entities and trusts can also co-invest and underwrite equity positions as well. So they have Indigenous Business Australia have just been provided extra powers under legislation to now go out to international investors to invest within Indigenous communities, and they will sort of underwrite those projects as well. So it may be worth kind of discussing with Indigenous Business Australia as well in terms of blended finance arrangements. But these arrangements can be kind of discussed on a case-by-case basis, depending on the particular organisation, the type of projects that you have, and also obviously the self-determination of the actual people. Next slide, please. So I'll just leave you with some practical takeaways. So I've got 7 points there that I'd like to kind of just reiterate on. So ensure you engage early and often with Indigenous communities. It's really important. Early is very important. This is one of the gripes of many communities that I've engaged in, where government or proponents have developed ideas and projects and not engaged communities till late, and that really upsets communities. So that should be one of the really important aspects of the development of projects. Resource participation, I discussed that. Co-design as much as possible. Quantify and share benefits. Innovate financing. There's plenty of ways to kind of blend finance arrangements. Tailor your engagement for the particular community. As I said, all communities are different. And monitoring and reporting as well is great to ensure that you really keep up that social license. My final word is let's make this transition not just a shift from an energy system, but a shift to how we work in genuine partnership with communities. So next slide, please. And those who are interested, these are my details if you'd like to take them down to get in contact. We do a lot of work with governments, as I said, corporations and communities, and would love to sort of work with proponents as well as we do going forward. So thank you, Amit. I'll hand it
Thank
back to
you.
you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks very much for that insightful presentation. And a few things that I picked up there. Your reference to the ASEN case study. Austrade actually has developed a full-blown case study, which is available for viewing on our website. So that's really good to see that, there's an overlap there in what you presented and what we've got already. And I think the co-design, the benefit sharing, all those points that you raised, really, really important, very valuable. And a big piece that I picked up there also is the Indigenous Business Finance Australia that can be approached for blended solutions, arrangements for financing those. So plenty there. Thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Damien Barnes, who's founder and managing director of Yimba Proprietary Limited. Yimba is just like Jarma, is 100% Indigenous owned, managed, and controlled by Damien, who's proud Bijara man from central Queensland with family connections to Warrabinda. Yimba provides legal, commercial management, and consulting services. Damien also has an extensive background in law, commercial management, and engineering, and has provided advice to infrastructure, construction, transport, mining, resources, energy, renewables, environment planning, indigenous business, native title, land claims, cultural heritage, reconciliation action plans, ESG, and dispute resolution. That's again a very, very extensive background. So thanks, Damien, and over to you for your
Thank,
presentation.
yeah, thank you, Ahmed. Sorry for putting you through all of that. I wasn't anticipating you'd read all of it, but a bit of a mouthful, but thank you. Yes, so just some photos of myself and my country and where I'm from. As mentioned, it's in central Queensland. Also sit on a variety of boards. So at present, I am director on SEC Victoria, which is the state-owned renewable energy company for the state of Victoria. So it does design, build, own, operate, and sell electrons into the grid for the state of Victoria. I've been on that board for about 2 years, involved with Westpac Banking Corporation as well, and Supply Nation, which is the national Indigenous business organisation, which registers and certifies Indigenous businesses as Indigenous businesses. Thank you. Next slide. I might just also just give a quick acknowledgement. So apologies, I should have said that at the start. So I'll do it in my own lingo in Bidjara. Nai Naka la Gadigal Yambajin Warang. I acknowledge the Gadigal people who belong to Sydney. Duna Waragan Wararing Buru Nunti, their elders, spirits and country. Nai Naka la Yinda. I acknowledge you. Yuringa Wadagan Wararing Buru Nunti, your elders, spirits and country. Najunaya Damien Barnes. My name's Damien Barnes. Yambajina Pitara Nanti Waja Murubu. I belong Bidjara country from Carnarvon Ranges. So I won't spend much time on this slide. This is just the similar map which Brian put up earlier. It just shows the different First Nations communities across the country. It's quite a patchwork quilt. So thank you. Next slide. So what I wanted to talk about here in relation to building trust and communications across the project life cycle is just a bit of a focus around FPIC, free prior informed consent, because that essentially forms the basis for social license. In Australia, the UNDRIP related principles are not necessarily legislated into law, but they do set the benchmark, particularly internationally, for those international and foreign investors who would be familiar with UNDRIP principles in respect of First Nations people all over the globe. Is that a lot of the global companies that operate in mining, energy, and resources spaces tend to adopt a higher level. They'll basically take a snapshot of the requisite standards across the globe and apply the higher order standard, because it's not necessarily a great look to start cherry picking lower standards to apply to a specific domestic country. So a lot of countries adopt a kind of higher order, and in terms of UNDRIP related principles, that's an important set of principles which are typically applied. You'll see on this slide there's references in particular in UNDRIP to Articles 3, 18, 19, 27, 26, and 31, and they kind of form the basis for the context or the framework for social license and making sure that that's obtained by proponents when they're undertaking projects across the country. Next slide. So Brian did talk about methods of engagement and how to engage appropriately early on an ongoing basis. And maybe just to add to that, just the focus on how trust is built. It's important to talk the talk and walk the walk. Brian also emphasised it's so important to get in early rather than leave it at the end of your project. Typically, Indigenous communities will operate very much on a consensus basis decision-making process. Building consensus within a very large community takes quite a bit of time, so it's important to get in early. Also important, the sort of open, honest, transparent communication. A lot of these communities, they'll see a lot of, basically, particularly in the remote and regional areas, people only come to them when they want something, is the short story. So if a proponent is door knocking, the first presumption, a lot of these communities have been disturbed and gone through it. There's a lot of significant history which has impacted on them. They're still going through sort of recovering from those historical, events. And so often there is a high level of suspicion and wariness associated with any new person who comes door knocking to say, I've got a deal for you. So it does take time to, connect with the right people, to establish that relationship and to build that trust in order to conduct your business. And then typical things around eroding trust. So, we talked about, don't leave it late. The community doesn't care necessarily about your deadlines. They've got a whole heap of other things and other priorities which they're kind of working through. So you need to, understand where they're at and where they're coming from and what their priorities are and how to respectfully engage with them as well. Also getting your head around their decision-making processes and who are the right people to speak to. For example, if you're speaking to the wrong people who aren't elders, you can kind of erode the hierarchy structure within the community as well. Next slide, please. Brian touched a little bit on this. I won't spend too much time, but this map shows the Indigenous rights and interests in land across the country. So all of these different colours on the map here indicate a different type of land tenure, which is owned by what I call the Indigenous estate. So it could be owned by an Indigenous native title corporation, it could be owned by a land council, it could be owned by a private for-profit business which owns land in freehold, for example. So under Australian law, there's all different types of land tenure. And so this map just simply demonstrates the types of different forms of land ownership held by different groups across the country. So that gives you a bit of an idea. And Brian emphasised at the start of this that my understanding, it was something like 40 or 50% of all sort of future renewables related projects will be conducted on land which has an Indigenous form of ownership. So it's important to understand how to properly engage. Next slide, please. So I'll just expand a bit here on the free, prior, informed consent. So you'll hear FPIC thrown around quite a bit in the Australian context. So what does it mean? So free, it means consent must be voluntarily given and free from coercion. Prior means consent must be obtained before an activity is carried out. Informed means the group has been informed in all the relevant information about the project in a language and in a manner that they understand. And consent is the right of the person or group to decide whether to consent. Importantly, you'll just see in the middle of the slide here, FPIC is not a veto right, like a procedural duty. It's generally been interpreted to mean it's a robust process of consultation and negotiation with Indigenous communities who have been impacted by the particular project. And so the consequence of failing to meet FPIC will impact the social license for the proponent to operate on the project. So technically, there is a legal kind of baseline which is set. The FPIC expectations sit over and above in terms of establishing the social license, and it penetrates across all the various different rights and interests that Indigenous groups have in terms of requiring a more robust, good faith consultation process in all of those different legal rights and interests that they may be able to exercise. So planning, cultural heritage, native title, environment, all of these existing kind of baseline legal rights and interests. Just to quickly emphasize here, there's two cases. There's a Canadian case, which is at the bottom left of your screen. That was probably the most recent one, which provided a common law interpretation of what FPIC means, which is what I'd stated earlier in terms of the three principles above, excuse me. And in the Australian context, that's probably an example of FPIC in operation with the Tiwi Islands and Santos Orbust, the Barossa project. So you may have heard about this in the paper maybe 6 to 12 months ago. The important thing here is that the First Nations community were becoming a bit more sophisticated in terms of their causes of actions and complaints against what I'd call traditionally second order parties. So normally the First Nations communities would either litigate or make complaints under various pieces of legislation against the actual proponent. But in this case, the First Nations group was more sophisticated in that they also started pursuing what I call the second order stakeholders who sit behind the project proponents. So the one I draw your attention is the banks. So the big four banks within Australia were all exposed to complaints made by the Tiwi Islanders by virtue of the fact that they had provided business loans to the proponent specifically for that project. And so the First Nations community were complaining that firstly, the proponent had not properly engaged by applying FPIC-related principles, but in addition, the banks had also failed to apply FPIC-related principles as well. So So all of these other stakeholders who sit behind the project proponents are now they were caught off guard initially through that particular case. They were forced to kind of consider, what does FPIC mean in an operational context in terms of providing finance to a proponent. Could you go to the next slide, please? So here we talk about building trust and communication. I will have to push through the presentation, noting timeframes, and I note that Brian also touched on some of these. So one was start early, two was map the local governance structure of particular communities, ensure cultural integrity, so they're engaging in the right way, assist and support building decision-making capacity where possible, and recording and upholding the consent and following through. Next slide, please. So here we're just a quick summary on problem solution and goals. So when you go to, typically when you were dealing with a lot of First Nations communities, there's a huge amount of history and issues which the community is working through. And there's often chronic underinvestment, particularly in remote and regional communities where most of these projects will take place. So there is a need for significant investment and assistance in upskilling and assisting in capacity as well. So that includes, technical vocational training, incorporation, governance-related advice, and assistance around contracting as well. From a goal perspective, often the community will look at your project in the context of economic empowerment and economic sovereignty, and it's an opportunity to help them get on their feet to participate in what I call the real economy. So that it's important for the proponents to the extent they can, to assist that process. Next page, please. What I'll talk about here, just quickly, is Brian gave some examples around, the two specific projects. I might just talk here about, some of the big ticket items that are typically considered in respect of community benefit agreements. So often the community will table, we want, obviously early engagement in terms of, cultural clearance related work, the ability, potentially naming rights in respect of your project, naming of particular assets on your project, artwork, keeping places for cultural items which have been identified to be kept on or near the project site, employment opportunities, typically, subcontracting opportunities as well. They will also want you to consider whether you can support them in incorporating for-profit entities, which can then bid for subcontracting opportunities back to the proponent as well. So this is quite important. Other examples too exist in relation to establishment of Indigenous business joint ventures. So there might be skills gaps. You support the community. You'll undertake a due diligence of a community, help them incorporate, identify potential skills gaps, and it may be that business is best placed in setting up an Indigenous business joint venture, for example, with existing contractors of the proponent that have a solid trust relationship there to facilitate the Indigenous businesses to grow. So that's employment. Other pieces, Brian touched on the equity piece. So often this will kind of be encapsulated in a package. So, jobs, cultural clearance, subcontracting arrangements, joint venture potentially, and also potentially a free carry in respect of equity. So commonly that whole bundle would be in the range of, from my understanding in the projects I've been involved in, that kind of benefits package is typically something around about 1% of the overall return expected on the project. The other thing which the community may table, if they're able, is to say, over and above the community benefits package, we also would like the right to be able to raise funds to acquire a commercial equity stake in the SPV that you set up to deliver the project as well. So next slide, please. Is that, I'm still seeing the same slide
Yeah, that's okay. Maybe Natasha has
locked up.
frozen for a second. I can take over. We provisioned for these to happen.
Perfect timing, isn't it?
No, it'd be fine. It won't happen, but that's okay. It did. Now,
While you're doing that, I'll just check in with Ahmed. Roughly how much time did you wish to leave for questions?
We're leaving 10 minutes, but yeah, and
Okay.
we're just about there, but I guess please continue with your
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, no worries. So on this slide, I'll talk about the state and territory and Commonwealth governments, what I'll call the Indigenous procurement requirements. So typically each state and territory and Commonwealth will have a legislated target the proponents are required to meet, and it will set a percentage. So on this slide here, you'll see percentages which range from around about 1% all the way up to, I think I saw 4%, which is the percentage spend expected by the government to be directed towards Indigenous businesses in your supply chain when delivering the project. And I'll draw your attention, particularly in the renewable space, to New South Wales, so the Electricity Infrastructure Investment Act 2020. So that embeds Aboriginal participation, local jobs and apprenticeships in renewables projects, and it mandates 1.5% for contract, and then for contracts over 7.5 million, and then it talks about bonus tender points for participation above 10%. So where you're tendering for a job, if you have Indigenous participation above 10%, then you'll receive additional bonus tender points as well. Anyway, so that's an important piece to the puzzle. And so aside from, the social license expectation, there is also government requirements around Indigenous engagement as well. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'll just quickly talk about power asymmetry and enforcement barriers. So firstly, at the front end of your project, it's really important to make sure that the community or First Nations you deal with have the requisite experts around them, including lawyers, to negotiate the deal. It's really important. The sort of, consensus ad idem must have a meeting of the minds in order to make sure that the agreement's enforceable, and that each community or First Nations knows what they're signing up for. And so that's a really important piece. That's not only at the front end, but then also it's important from a budgeting perspective to make sure that through execution of the project, in order to maintain relationships and also make sure that the agreement is working, that there is a budget there to facilitate groups to properly engage with you through the full duration of the project. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm conscious. What I'll say here, I'm very conscious of the time. What I'll say here is, with the communities in the mining space, there is a lot of old or legacy in dealing with Indigenous communities, which kind of set the bar low. In the renewable space, there is a definite new, it's an opportunity to reset, and for the renewable energy proponents to engage more appropriately in the current sort of legal and social license environment. And you're seeing that happening with a lot of these projects, in particularly in respect of, the jobs, employment, training, free carry, opportunities to buy into projects. So the agreement is not just, you sign it, chuck it in the drawer and walk away. it's important. These projects are very long, ongoing things. They're important to make sure that you engage, monitor, ensure compliance. If it gets a bit sticky from time to time, it's investing the time to make sure that you right any relationship that's might be waning through the course of the project. Next slide, please. Noting the time, I'll skip this slide. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about the decommissioning just very quickly. So, typically, the decommissioning phase is an area where Indigenous groups are very keen to get involved in. They see themselves very much as custodians of the land and responsible for caring for country. So, to the extent the project, is going through, the decommissioning phase, and there is a kind of a repair or a healing of the country involved, the First Nations communities see themselves as front and central in terms of the responsibility to assist, support, and drive that process. So it's really important to make sure that during that decommissioning phase that they're involved and that it's done in a culturally appropriate way to help the land heal. It's also important to look at it from a future land use perspective as well. There might be assets on the land which could be handed over, for example, to the communities for their use at a later point in time. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that in the time frame. So that's it for that slide. Can't recall what's next if I'm close to the end now. I won't spend too much time here. From a decommissioning perspective, I'm just highlighting here the particular articles of UNDRIP that are relevant. Okay, so 29 talks about waste management and hazardous disposal removal. 28 and 32 talk about compensation for redress for environmental harm, etc. And 18 is in relation to First Peoples' right in respect of decision making on land rehab as well. I'll leave it at that. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it. And likewise, Ahmed will pass on my details. So if anyone needs to speak to me, more than happy to chat. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Damien, for your comprehensive insights on all aspects, communication, trust building, or throughout the life of the project, and the FPIC principles, and building on social expectations. You touched upon the very important aspects of procurement, upskilling, employment, and just at the end towards decommissioning. So thank you very much. That was a lot to cover in a very short space of time. So I appreciate that. But let's now move on to the Q&A segment. And I'll hand over to my colleague Arden, based in Canberra, to see if there are any questions on Slido. Arden? Or
Yes.
any in the
No.
chat?
Yeah. No. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time you've taken, Damien and Brian, for that presentation. I think we all found that very insightful. I did, looking at the chat, haven't got anything coming in to the Teams chat, although I did receive a few emails prior to the presentation with some questions. So the first question here is, how do we handle potential power imbalances to ensure a more equitable relationship and partnership?
Did you want to go, Brian?
Yeah, might as well. You can take the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So what's been happening in Australia is that government have been providing the grant systems to assist Indigenous communities in getting on equal footing, particularly here in Victoria. There are trusts kind of set up for renewable energy transition. First Peoples Assembly of Victoria has got a trust sort of set up now to ensure that First Peoples have the right sort of resources and personnel to assist in negotiating agreements. But importantly, but these are few and far between. So what I want to say is that, and I mentioned that in my presentation as well, that when organisations or proponents come onto country to then negotiate arrangements with proponents, there should be some budget set aside as well for projects to assist communities in negotiating. So at the end of the day, what you really want is the organisation that you are dealing with. Usually it's an organisation, whether it's a PBC or another representative body that represents the local community, to be on an equal footing. And if they're not appropriately resourced, they should set aside some budget for that. Otherwise, as I said, there are grant funding arrangements available through organisations like ARENA, Clean Energy Finance, etc. Your organisation perhaps could assist the communities and resource a grant application to then apply to the particular organisation to get some grant funding through the door to assist in that. But it's all about ensuring that the organisations and the communities are resourced appropriately to negotiate on an equal footing as well. So there's nothing worse than a large organisation coming into an arrangement where they're dealing with a smaller organisation that is very under-resourced, which quite often happens and used to happen more often within the mining boom, where I've seen many agreements that have been negotiated where there's a trickle of royalties come down to the Indigenous communities. But now we want to kind of flip that and change that so organisations are on an equal footing. They get a fair share of whatever arrangement is being put forward, including, as we discussed, appropriate equitable shareholding within a particular project. And they assist in co-designing as well. So all of that needs to be funded so they have appropriate representation. So it's not only from a legal consulting basis, it's also ensuring that they have advice from, the correct financial institutions, et cetera, to ensure that their skin in the game is viable as well in terms of the project.
Yep.
Hope that answers your question.
Could I just add to that too? I think particularly when you're dealing with community, there's a huge amount of variability in terms of knowledge and understanding around the projects as well. So it's, as Brian said, it's about making sure that you've established, sort of built up and established the baseline in terms of understanding your project, and also when you're dealing with a board. There'll be various levels of skills and experience in different areas. So it's definitely about investing the time to make sure when you're dealing with, say, a native title prescribed body corporate or an Indigenous organisation, that you're keeping the board as much up to speed as possible and making sure that there's an established baseline so they can understand your project and the deal in order to get consent.
I think also just to cap that off, it really ensures also that your organisation has appropriate social licence as well, so they're not seen as dealing, inappropriately with the community. So that's really important in this day of ESG as well.
Yeah.
Are there more questions, Arden?
Great, thank you so much. Look, we might have time for one quick question. I've just stopped sharing because I'm multitasking a little bit here, but we do have one more, and it's if you could please comment on ways developers and projects can incorporate First Nations traditional knowledge into the design process.
You want me to take that one, Brian?
Yeah, you can go, and I'll back you up on that.
So first thing I'd say is the points that both Brian and I emphasise is the early engagement piece. So when during the design phase, you'll obviously go through the cultural heritage clearance related work, but often that's undertaken when you already have a kind of baseline or sort of proposed set out for the project. But I think if you early engage with the community, they can point out to you in respect of that land, where are the areas of important cultural significance, one, to avoid, and two, to sort of also work with and around to mitigate impact. Obviously, there'll be situations where, for the particular project and the activities on the land, there may be some conflicts in respect of those land use identifications by community. But I think, that's an important stage that you have to obviously work through. In terms of and then also uh, even things as basic as, the layouts of roads, the drainage system, naming of roads, naming of infrastructure and assets on the project, artwork on assets. It seems like it might be something reasonably that is, on the proponent side, might be seen as something that's relatively small, but for the community, it also creates a sense of ownership and belonging and incorporation of the project into the landscape, which is important. So, yeah, I think that's probably it from me. Brian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think involving Indigenous cultural knowledge as well really de-risks the project and allows the community as well to have skin in the game. So they really have that, can impart their knowledge of the particular area for thousands of years. And as Damien spoke about, we don't want to go through that Duke and Gorge issue again, where the particular organisation or the community knew about paintings. For those international people who don't understand this particular case, there's a 45,000-year-old paintings within caves in Western Australia where Rio Tinto had gone through a process, but they hadn't appropriately taken into consideration the concerns of the community and blew up a cave with 45,000-year-old cave paintings. So that was really, I guess, obviously disrespectful, but just a terrible kind of situation for the community to have to go through. So that's one of the aspects as well, just really understanding that the knowledge of the particular area for thousands of years, as opposed to just some recent scientific sort of studies that usually these processes go through. And also it really risks delaying projects as well, ensuring that you have the community on board, and once again gives you that social license. So there are many kind of aspects to this, but I think really an important aspect is de-risking the project as well, getting the organisation on board and meaningfully engaged through their cultural aspects as well, because cultural not only means the knowledge, but it also means their negotiation process as well, and ensuring that their dispute resolution process is appropriately considered, because they're all different as well, and that's part of the whole process of engaging and understanding their knowledge.
Yeah, I might just quickly add too that you've got an Australian legal planning system that has designated land use zones. Is that within each First Nations community, they will also have their own Indigenous land use zones as well, which overlay. And so it's in your early engagement, it's important to understand what are those areas, what's the use, births, deaths, marriages, camping, hunting, fishing, all those places. And to the extent there's flexibility in respect of placement of assets on the project, that's something that if it's at all possible, would go a long way to incorporate the group's, their perception of the lie of the land and the right uses.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Armin, I might
Thanks.
pass to you to wrap things up.
Thanks, Hardin. Thanks very much. And I know we could go on for hours talking about this, as you both had said earlier, that 1 hour is not enough, but I'm sure we can have many more conversations, and we should. We should continue the conversations on this. But thank you so much, Brian and Damien, for your valuable insights. They've just been incredible, and learned a lot today. And thank you to everyone else who attended today's webinar as well. Your engagement is crucial as we work towards a just and an inclusive energy transition, especially for our First Nations peoples. A copy of the recording will be available soon after. We also welcome feedback, including topics that you would like us to cover for future webinars. So because we are at time, actually way over time, I'd like to close the session, and thank you all for your attendance today, and have a
Thank
lovely
you.
day.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.